Snow clung to the stone walls of Munich's Stadelheim prison on the morning of February 22nd, 1943. The air inside was heavy, muffled, almost reverent, as though even the building understood what was about to happen. Guards moved briskly down the halls, their boots sharp on the worn floors, and the echo of keys turned every corner into a reminder of captivity. In a small cell sat a 21-year-old student, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm, almost serene. Her name was Sophie Scholl, and in only a few hours she would be dead. Just days earlier, Sophie had stood in the courtyard of the University of Munich with her brother Hans. The war had dragged into its fourth brutal year, and Germany's cities were crumbling under bombs. The Scholls, like many young people, had been raised under the Nazi regime's banners and chants. Sophie herself had once marched in the Hitler Youth, dutifully carrying the flag and singing the songs. But as she grew older, she saw the gulf between the promises of glory and the reality of cruelty. Books were banned, people vanished overnight, and Jewish neighbors disappeared without explanation. The fiery patriotism of her youth cooled into doubt, and doubt hardened into resistance. The white rose grew out of this realization. Sophie, Hans, and a circle of friends, Alexander Schmorell, Willy Graf, Christoph Probst, and Professor Kurt Huber, gathered in secret to discuss what few dared even whisper. They read forbidden literature, poetry, and philosophy. They studied the Bible and the classics, searching for words that explained what they saw happening around them. What emerged was a belief that silence was complicity. To be German did not mean to obey blindly. It meant to stand for truth, even against one's own government. Their weapons were not guns or explosives. They used words, pamphlets, written in plain language but searing in their clarity, urged Germans to resist tyranny, to refuse blind obedience, to recognize the atrocities being committed in their name. On February 18th, Sophie and Hans carried a suitcase filled with these leaflets into the university. They moved quietly, placing stacks in lecture rooms and corridors, leaving them where students and faculty would find them. When the last of the papers remained, Sophie climbed the stairs to the top floor and, in a moment that would define her forever, pushed the stack from the railing. The leaflets fluttered downward like snow, scattering across the atrium. It was reckless, and it was beautiful, but it was also seen. A janitor loyal to the party reported them, and within minutes, Gestapo officers closed in. The interrogations began immediately. Sophie faced her captors with a calm defiance that startled even hardened officials. The Gestapo demanded to know why she had spread treason. She answered simply, because what was happening was wrong. She admitted her role in the distribution, refusing to paint herself as a passive follower. But she also refused to betray the others. Time and again, she diverted suspicion away from friends whose lives might still be spared. Those present recalled her clarity, her composure, and above all, her refusal to cower before men who held her life in their hands. The trial was convened with ruthless efficiency. Within 4 days of her arrest, Sophie sat before Judge Roland Freisler of the People's Court, infamous for his theatrical tirades and merciless sentences. Freisler barked accusations of treason, of weakening morale, of undermining the war effort. His voice rose and cracked like a whip, meant to intimidate, to humiliate. Sophie did not shrink. When given the chance to speak, she did not beg for mercy or deny her actions. She told the truth with a courage that rang through the chamber. Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did. Those words carried no weight with the court. The verdict had been decided before the trial began. Sophie, Hans, and Christoph Probst were sentenced to death. They were to be executed that very day. The swiftness was deliberate, designed to show the futility of resistance. Yet Sophie did not break. Guards who escorted her recalled her composure, the way she walked upright, unflinching, as though she had already made peace with what was to come. In her final hours, Sophie was allowed a few brief moments with her parents. Her mother embraced her, tears in her eyes, and asked, "Sophie, remember Jesus?" Sophie replied, "Yes, but you too." Her father told her, "You will go down in history." There is still justice to the very end. Their family clung not to despair, but to faith that truth would outlast tyranny. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Sophie was led to the guillotine. She walked steadily, her face pale but calm, her steps neither hurried nor dragged. Witnesses said she looked almost radiant, as though carrying an inner light. Her last words before the blade fell were remembered long after the war. "Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter, if through us thousands are awakened and stirred to action?" Moments later, the blade dropped, and Sophie Scholl was no more. She was 21 years old. Hans followed her within minutes, crying out, "Long live freedom," as he mounted the scaffold. Christoph Probst, the young father of 3 children, was executed after them. 3 lives cut short in the span of an hour, extinguished for the crime of speaking truth in a world suffocated by lies. The regime believed it had silenced them, but the white rose was not so easily erased. The Gestapo gathered the pamphlets as evidence, yet copies had already made their way beyond Munich. Smuggled across borders, they reached Britain, where they were reprinted by the Allies and dropped over Germany in the thousands. Sophie's act of defiance, once confined to a university atrium, now rained down across her nation. In the months and years that followed, the Scholls became symbols. While millions remained silent, they had spoken. While others bowed, they had stood tall. Their courage cost them everything, but it also ensured that their names would never be forgotten. Today, schools, streets, and memorials across Germany bear Sophie Scholl's name. Her face, young and resolute, looks out from statues and portraits, a reminder that conscience cannot be silenced forever. Sophie's story is not one of despair, but of fierce hope. She was no soldier, no politician. She was a young woman who loved music, who studied biology and philosophy, who enjoyed hiking in the Bavarian mountains, who cherished laughter with friends. She could have lived quietly like so many others, pretending not to see. Instead, she chose truth, even when truth demanded her life. The prison at Stadelheim still stands, its walls silent witnesses to her final walk. To stand there now is to feel the weight of history and the defiant light of a life that ended too soon but burned so brightly it still illuminates the darkness of that era. Sophie Scholl's execution was meant to erase her voice. Instead, it gave her words immortality, carried on by every generation that repeats her story. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.